Testing 1, 2, 3. This will be the September 24th, 2014 City Council Workshop Meeting.
I think about the last 7 or 8 months of the second quarter.
Good evening. I'd like to call to order a special workshop. The City Council Satellite Beach, September 24th, 2014, approximately 7 p.m. We're going to discuss, make recommendations on the board committee handbook. So we'll turn it over to Lorraine.
Okay, I have several of the boards which I have modified, board descriptions. There are still 4 others that I haven't gotten to yet. 2 of those are the most difficult to include, those 2 retirement plans boards. But we'll go through what I've done here so far. And basically, I put my comments to you in red, and basically what the procedure or technique that I followed was that all generally applicable board provisions which appear in the city code have been removed from the board descriptions and placed in section 2 of this handbook, which is general information that applies to all boards. And then most of the remaining code provisions have been moved to the following board descriptions, while a few provisions probably need to remain in the code. So we'll start with the beautification board. And I'll just comment. These are my source documents. If you want to see a junk pile, it's this: that every board had multiple documents allegedly governing it. And when that happens, it's axiomatic that they conflict, they have errors, and they're redundant. So the beautification board is governed by Chapter 30, Article 2, Division 4 of the City Code, and it also has its own set of bylaws. And so I'm recommending that that section of the code dealing with the beautification board be deleted, rescinded, as well as it's going to be a flat recommendation for all boards that all of the bylaws, charters, separate rules of procedure, all of that be rescinded because it is not necessary and it inevitably causes problems. The point is to put everything that we need to know about a given board in this handbook, and then we have only one place to go to when we want information about a board or we need to change something about a board. So what I have here under beautification board, every board was laid out in the categories of board established and the duties, the number of members, the term of office, whether or not financial disclosure is required, which office handles the support staff and recording secretary, and when their regular meetings are. Everything here about the beautification board was in the city charter, or the city code, or I should say that in the reverse, which is that everything that was in the city code about the beautification board is right here now. So we can rescind that code provision.
Okay. Question on that?
Go ahead.
Term of office. Is it 3 years now, or are you recommending everything be 3 years?
We had agreed last time that everything would be 3 years.
Sure.
And there are some boards that are statutorily required to be 3 years, so that number works out well for all of them then.
Okay.
I have not yet discussed these code provisions with Attorney Beadle, but I know he wouldn't disagree with me. The next board is the
beautification board. I don't have any issues with.
what?
For beautification board, I don't have any issues with that.
Thank you.
The council created that board themselves, so they can
Yeah.
deal with it as they wish.
Okay. The Board of Adjustment is next. The Board of Adjustment is currently governed by the City Code, Chapter 30, Article 2, Division 2. It also has its own bylaws and its own rules of procedure. And I have moved to this handbook those code provisions which fit the template of the handbook, and have left the other very important provisions which can remain in the code. And my recommendation for the Board of Adjustment is to let the Board of Adjustment be governed by both this handbook and the supplemental provisions in the code, and to revise the code as shown below, which in that revision removes redundant provisions and retains all other current Board of Adjustment provisions. I changed almost nothing in what you see on the next page, section 30-201. I changed the section number because the sections above it had been deleted, so I just moved that number up. And I think I did strike, if you'll look at B3A1. About two-thirds down the page, I did strike the word building because a building is a structure. So that was a redundancy that wasn't necessary. But that's the only thing that I did with that language.
And going back to the first page here,
Yeah, thank you.
financial disclosure.
Yeah, I got it, okay.
You got it?
Yeah. Barbara Montanaro was kind enough to catch an error for me under required vote, no,
Under financial disclosure.
financial disclosure. Okay. If you'll go to the pages that were given to you at the beginning of this meeting, you can grab Planning and Zoning Board and look at financial disclosure. It's worded correctly there, and I will be making that change consistently with every other board.
That has financial disclosure. Okay.
Okay with that? You okay, Mark?
Oh, yes, yes. The only thing I had, Lorraine, you on page 4 of the Board of Adjustment, you also on number 4, you struck building there too. You didn't mention that, but I just thought, bring that out at the bottom. You had struck that too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Right, okay. As I worked through this, the Board of Adjustment is governed, the highest level of governing is the city code, which means we created it, it's our thing. And I'm just wondering if, rather than putting the powers and duties in the code, if we can't just move this to this description of the Board of Adjustment in the handbook. Keeping in mind that my goal is to have as few places to look for information about a given board as possible. And, later on after I submitted this, it occurred to me that would be workable. And keeping in mind also that this handbook is going to be adopted by ordinance.
That was going to be a question I had, because many of the boards by state law, by statute, have to be created by ordinance, as do all the memberships, and I was wondering how this handbook vis-a-vis the statutes was going to be dealt with. So, if it's going to be adopted by ordinance, then that gets rid of that particular issue. The only other issue that potentially can come up is if any amendments to the handbook need to be made or want to be made, they all have to be done by ordinance also.
That's correct.
That's my only comment.
So what are your thoughts on just including this in the handbook description?
I'm going to say, if Jim feels that's permissible, because I remember we had a conversation once, Jim, that you said there was certain requirements on certain boards and language that needed to be in certain sections. So,
well, the issue is that I go through the PZAB, the Code Enforcement Board. There's no specific statute about the Board of Adjustment, but because it is exercising, in essence, the city's sovereignty, so to speak, by granting variances and hearing appeals from the building official, I would not feel comfortable with that board not being created by ordinance either. And then obviously the pension boards all have to be created by ordinance also. So you know, there are cities that have, just so you know this, and I don't know that it makes any difference in your analysis or not, but there are cities that basically say we're creating this pursuant to the statute, and like for code enforcement board, and you establish the terms and, you know, how you determine who's going to be on the board, and then basically they just adopt the statute. So, I mean, obviously that's an option too, so that basically you'd have essentially maybe 2 sections or 3 sections for each board in the code to establish them and establish the membership on the boards and that. And that would be literally the only thing in the code book, and then you can say, you know, the balance of whatever you're going to do. I'm not obviously overstating it or understating, whatever you
The
want to say.
question is, can we put this into the handbook, get it out of the code for the Board of Adjustment?
As long as it's approved by ordinance, and as long as all the things that the I'm not talking about the Board of Adjustment solely at this point, but as long as all the other issues.
I want you to talk about the Board of Adjustment
Well, you
solely,
can't,
because
yeah.
I have dealt with each of these boards differently, as I need to do according to the law. So right now, we're just on the Board of Adjustment.
Yeah, I mean, as long as it's approved, as long as you approve it by ordinance, I don't have a problem with it, because basically you're just moving the ordinance into the handbook.
That's correct. Are we okay with doing that? then?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, we look at these things, and I mean, it's taken us this long to modify these this time. I mean, when are we going to do this again? It's not like we're going to be changing ordinances on a regular basis
Right.
to adopt any, you know, changes.
Let me tell you when I'm going to do this again.
Never.
This is over.
Don't say that.
I went deaf on that one, too. Okay. The next one is the Business Enhancement Committee. Say something into your microphone.
Can you hear me?
1, 2, 3, 4.
Hello, hello.
Okay.
I thought we were just doing boards. This is a committee.
There is no Business Enhancement
not
Committee
anymore,
anymore,
yeah.
so I am recommending that we rescind City Code Chapter 2, Article 3, Division 6, which covers the Business Enhancement Committee.
Just try this one. It's the same type of thing, but just see if that'll work better for you.
How's that, better?
Okay,
1, 2?
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine with me.
Yeah. no.
Okay. The next board is the Code Enforcement Board. And currently, the code enforcement is governed by at least 4 different sources: the Florida statutes, city code, bylaws, and rules of procedure. And inevitably, conflicting provisions abound, and just one example is this. CEB, Code Enforcement Board meetings will be held at least once each quarter, that's the bylaws, at least once every 2 months, that's the rules of procedure, and as required to conduct necessary business, that's the city code. So most of the provisions that appear in our code are taken directly from the Florida statutes. And my point is that the duplication is unnecessary. So I'm recommending for the Code Enforcement Board to let the Code Enforcement Board be governed only by the relevant Florida statutes and this handbook. Delete the Code Enforcement Board from the city code, and the code provisions which need to be retained are included below in this description. And then eliminate the bylaws, the separate rules of procedures, and any other directives that are floating around out there about this board. And to the extent allowed by Florida statutes, have the Code Enforcement Board conform to the general requirements for all other boards in this handbook. And my point is to stop making unnecessary distinctions for different boards. So culling information from all the sources that I had and eliminating conflicts and duplications, I recommend the following code enforcement provisions for this handbook. And in the provisions that are below, again, I took everything out of the code and put it in here, and and my final thing says, see attached Chapter 162, and there's a citation for the Florida statute, which also govern the Code Enforcement Board. So these provisions and the Florida statutes will be in the handbook to govern the Code Enforcement Board, and will eliminate the content in the city code. Also, you'll notice everywhere that I have written in red, those are the citations from the Florida statute that requires us to do these particular things.
Should that be,
I can't hear you.
I'm looking right. Should that be a Florida statute right there? FS?
Yeah.
Where it says board established.
I got it right here.
FS, yep.
Question.
Hmm?
To disband a board, it would have to be by ordinance then, once we create this by
Do an
ordinance?
ordinance to rescind that part of the code.
Okay. If we decide in future we go into a magistrate instead of code enforcement board in the future, that is done by ordinance?
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, and the Florida statute says that everything that applies in the statute regarding the Code Enforcement Board also applies to a special magistrate.
Okay, great.
So are we good with my recommendations on the Code Enforcement?
And the financial disclosure
Yeah,
is
I
going to
got it.
match the other.
I got it.
I have one comment about Code Enforcement Board.
Okay.
The way that the way that the Attorney General and the courts have interpreted the statute is that you have to follow the statute to the letter regarding how their powers are exercised and everything else. Based on that, and I'll have to confirm it, but based on that, I don't know that council can curtail the powers that are granted to the board to have their own rules of procedure if they decide to do it. In other words, I don't know that council can say that however they exercise their powers are subject to the authority of the council to approve them.
I'm missing your point.
You have any rules of procedure that the board has to be approved by the city council. The point I'm trying to make is the way that the courts and the Attorney General has interpreted the statute, the council may not have that authority because that authority is vested in the board.
What are you referring to?
You indicated somewhere in here, I don't remember where it is, that policies and procedures can only be approved with the consent of the council. I don't remember exactly where it is.
Rules of procedure.
No, that's not it.
I'm reading it someplace and I don't know where it is.
Yeah, no, that's not it. Additional board rules, is that where you are? Such rules shall not be inconsistent. No,
That's not it.
okay. Code Enforcement Board may adopt rules for conducting its hearings subject to approval by the city council. Okay. The very last part of Florida statute 162.13 says that those statutory provisions are supplemental to any other things that the local government wants to do. So when I read that, I saw it said to me that we may add to what is in the Florida statute. Other than that one provision, this thing directly mirrors the language in the Florida statute. And the reason I put that there, subject to approval by the city council, is to stop all of these stray documents from being created for these boards.
I understand why you want it in there. I'm just saying, I'm going to need to look at that section of the statute then, but I'm just saying the way the courts and the AGO has interpreted Chapter 162 is that if the city, actually it's not just us, but any local government that chooses to operate a code enforcement board, then it has to be strictly along what powers have been granted under the statute.
All right. Question real quick on statutes and how we're going to handle this. Do you want to wait, I'm asking this to the counselor, do we want to wait till we are done with all of this and then give this whole packet to Jim? Because there seems like there's going to be a lot of questions here for our attorney to look up. Or do we want?
Just a few.
Yes. So do we want to give him what we've gone over already after tonight and let him start? And then if there's changes to it, come back? Or do we want to give him the whole document after you finish all the rest of the boards? What's your thing?
Whatever council wants to do. I mean, I generally know what the issues are. I mean, it's just, like I said, I didn't know if council was going to approve this whole book by ordinance or not, because obviously that gets past one of the concerns I had. Because if you're going to adopt it by ordinance, then that gets rid of some of the problems.
Yeah.
Part of my
Potential issues, I should say.
Okay, why don't we wait until the whole document is done and give it to you then, and then you can see how it hangs together
That's fine.
instead of piecemealing.
All right.
The other thing with code enforcement is that, and I can't remember if it's come up at a meeting here or not, but Courtney's brought up the fact that wants to get rid of the board as it exists for code enforcement, just because we really haven't had that many cases per se, and the people that are on the code enforcement board are people that could be on other boards in the city, and so she's been talking about going to, the special magistrate way. So that wouldn't be a board anymore.
That's
so.
why I asked the question on how we were handling this, so that if we went the way of a magistrate, have we boxed ourselves in a corner, and how do we get out? We have to get out by ordinance. We would create an ordinance to disband the code enforcement board and establish the magistrate, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
And I don't have any comments for the next two. The library and recreation board are obviously, those are clearly just
Let me
city-created
throw
boards, too.
Something
so.
out, too.
Okay,
If this is something, what I hate to do is all this work we put in this section of the code enforcement board, and this is going to take some time. Looking at all these documents, to me, this is going to take some time for us to have another workshop.
2 more workshops.
Okay? And then Jim look over all this, then it comes back to council to vote on.
Right.
Well, if that's a 2 or 3 month period, let me just, for the conversation, are we going to get rid of the code enforcement board? Is Courtney going to get rid of this board within the 3 months so that as soon as you adopt this, it has to be changed anyway?
Well, I think that's a question that we need to
I'd like
have
to
with
see
her.
it have
just to
answered
find- yeah.
before we, because obviously what we really would like is when we're finished here, it's a working document that doesn't need to be changed the next week.
That makes sense to, however we're going to deal with code enforcement, to deal with that at the same time you deal with this handbook, too, so.
Yeah.
Then let's just make that our objective.
Well, yeah, I just want to make sure we brought it up, and
Yeah.
you put a lot of work into it, and the last, meeting, we don't want to have to say, okay, we're going to redo this. Okay.
Okay, so, barring any unforeseen legal issues, are you okay with what I'm recommending on code enforcement?
Yeah.
Next is the library board. That one was kind of fascinating. You see, the library board has its own bylaws. I have 2 different versions of their bylaws. Which 1, repeat all the code provisions regarding this board, 2, contradict some of the provisions of this handbook, and 3, contain provisions which apply to the library staff and operations having absolutely nothing to do with the board. So, the current code language that for duties is there, and it's just one of those sentences that just put a lot of words together and means nothing. So I'm recommending the language that just says simply, the library board advises and assists library staff on programs, services, and issues affecting the Satellite Beach Public Library. And the rest of this is the language out of the provisions out of the city code. So I'm recommending that we do away with the code provision regarding the library, and again, eliminate all the bylaws and all those extraneous documents. Are we okay with that recommendation?
Yes.
Recreation Board is next. Has its own bylaws, which repeat all the code provisions regarding this board and also contradicts some of the provisions in our handbook. So I'm recommending that the code provisions regarding the rec board be eliminated, as well as the bylaws and all other governing documents that may be floating around. This this language here is out of the city code, and in looking through the code, I came upon, from time to time, I came upon provisions that impacted other boards. And to the extent that I found those, I took those provisions to those boards so that the boards would also be aware of them. I would bet the homestead that nobody is aware of this business with the Comprehensive Planning Board. And I'm also not even sure that the rec board would be something that the Comprehensive Planning Board would try to do any planning about or with, but it's possible. So for any of the boards that may have some function that would touch upon what the Comprehensive Planning Board does, I have included that City Code Section 2-96 just as a heads up kind of thing that this might happen.
The only other thing I had on this one is, for last year I was the liaison to the rec board, and they were meeting here in the council chambers.
Okay.
Because, you know, back when they met at the Schechter Center, the rooms weren't getting used.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't think we want to box them into where they should meet. You know, should we give them the option of either meeting at the Schechter Center or the city council chambers? Because Carrie is generally the one that makes the determination. Because if we're going to accept this by ordinance, we don't want to box it in.
Inappropriate, because, you know, just like Sampson's Island, they've met at the dock to go to Sampson's Island, and they've had meetings, so it's just different locations according to sometimes the topic of discussion. For the most part, they have been meeting here, but there could be a time when they meet at the Schechter Center.
So we're going to run into that same scenario at Sampson's Island. So we should make whatever it is consistent for those two boards.
And what are you suggesting?
At a location deemed appropriate.
Yeah.
At a location determined by the rec department?
Yeah.
The only question I have on the packet as a whole, and I've seen it a couple of times in the last few years, on the beautification board time. We've had some pretty good, on the beautification board time, 9 o'clock on a Friday morning, we've had some pretty good applicants who'd signed up and were good, and couldn't make it because they work. So that board's starting at 9. I know that the people are very dedicated, but that board then is generally going to be retired people that can be on the board. So we're limited on the diversity on that board through the community here. It's a 9 o'clock board on a Friday morning. Most boards, if you go through all our packet, and I know at one time we were trying to get everything to start at 7 so that people would know meetings started at 7 o'clock. My thing is I think that board is tough to get people on it unless they are retired. And I don't know how they feel, that the people that are on it, but to me, if there was a night that they could meet that was a 7 o'clock start, 6, you would have a more diverse board and more people to get on it.
Okay, let me look into this a bit
Yeah,
further.
okay.
Okay.
We had a guy that got off the board because he just couldn't make it, and he worked in that field.
Okay.
Remember? Yeah. Yep.
And I also wonder about the 6:15 time for the rec board. Where did that come from?
There's been fluctuation by the retirement board, I guess.
I can't hear you,
There
Lenore.
has been discussion at the retirement board that they went from 6 to 6:15, so sometimes they change that according to...
Now, this is the rec board.
Yes,
You said retirement board.
I'm sorry, recreation board.
Well, I can tell you what happened with that, because that happened while I was the liaison. There was one woman who had issues with time, and earlier was better for her, so they started the meetings 45 minutes early to accommodate her schedule.
Well, again, I don't think it's critical, but I know what we were trying to get to was that
Uniform.
there was some uniformity to it when our board meeting, 7 o'clock. And it didn't matter what board you were on, you could,
I remember that discussion.
Yeah, and it makes sense to me. So let me look into that, too.
and again, I don't want, like, the beautification board, I don't want to put people who've worked for years, and that's when they can do it, but, you know, if you look at our boards right now, we need people on certain boards, and,
That's not one of them.
well, there is some, we lost a couple people on that beautification board because of the time, yep. So,
Okay, let me look into that some more. Okay, with those changes, are we okay with the rec board?
Yes.
The next one is Sampson's Island. Depending upon which document you look at, you'll find a different name for that Sampson's Island board. City code that covers the Sampson's Island board committee calls it by two different names. So, this board is governed by the city code, bylaws, and a charter. Needless to say, they conflict with one another, contain obsolete provisions, state the obvious, and contradict some of the provisions in this handbook. The bylaws also attempt to repeat some of the code provisions regarding this board, so I'm recommending. First of all, you know, we're getting away from committee calling permanent standing panels. We're calling those boards, and if it's a temporary ad hoc panel, then we're calling those committees. With that in mind, this will be called a board, and I have talked to Carrie, and she's okay with calling this the Sampson's Island Working Board, because this board is very, very different from the others. These folks are supposed to get out there on the island and work. So she was okay with that name for it. So I'm recommending that we rescind the city code provision that deals with this board. All of its provisions are included below in this right up here in the handbook. Rescind all of the bylaws, charters, and everything else floating around. Let this board be governed only by this handbook, and rename the board to more accurately reflect what it does. And here's another one that's a 6 o'clock meeting, and I question that. So let me...
I'm the liaison to it, and I can tell you I had a hard time getting to some of them at 6.
Yeah,
I know it's pushing it.
Yeah, okay,
Now, 2 to 3 years, again, my memory, did we tell them we've gone over this from 2 to 3? Does that board know?
we haven't, as far as I know, we haven't told any of the boards yet, because this hasn't been finalized.
Again, once we do it, we need to go back and check and see how that's going to affect
Right.
each of those positions on the boards that we do change.
Right.
You know, the other thing that, and I'm just going to throw this out, I kind of like the consistency of 7 o'clock, but I think you have to go back to some of these boards and committees. I think they came up with the times they're meeting at because it was convenient for them as the board. Now, whether or not it's going to be convenient for future members, we don't know. We don't know if we change it to 7 o'clock, if it's going to be convenient for the people that are on there, and we might lose them. So, you know, we need to be careful how I think we need to go back to the committees and say, we're thinking about doing this. Can you tell us how you feel?
I'm going to.
Okay.
I'm going to talk to Carrie.
Right, and I'm not sure if 6 is not a reason for Carrie. She's there, she's off at 5:30,
Okay.
and they're all there. So, again, just trying to get some consistency if we can.
Okay.
Yeah.
And one way around this is to say that these board meetings will start at 7 or another time designated by these are rec department boards, decided by the rec board. That's one way of handling it, and that gives them time to, make adjustments if members prefer that it be some other time. Does that work?
I have a suggestion. As far as the time and, or for the meetings, regular meetings for the time and place, you could say that those will be established by resolution of council, and whenever you hand out the handbook, that you are able to substitute the page and just say currently scheduled for whatever the date and time are. So that way you can just change the date and time by resolution, and you don't have to say when there actually are. You can just put, like I said, you just put currently the third Tuesday of the month at 6 o'clock.
And that's creating another governing document, and that's exactly what I'm trying to get away from.
It gives you flexibility without having to change the code.
Well, so does saying at 7 o'clock or another time as designated by the Recreation Department.
But that still doesn't give you the date.
Talking to you.
That still doesn't give you the date and time per se necessarily in the handbook.
It's okay.
Okay, I'm just saying that's.
When we get through this section, I'll open it up for public comment.
Okay. Then we get to P and Z. Currently, this one outdid itself. This one is governed by the city charter, the city code, bylaws, procedures, and another document just called Planning and Zoning Advisory Board. The problems with the latter three are the usual suspects: errors, obsolescence, redundancy, and contradiction with this code, this handbook, and one another. So for P and Z, I'm recommending that P and Z be governed by the city charter, this handbook, and supplemental provisions in the code. And rescind the bylaws, procedures, and all the other extraneous documents, and revise the city code as shown below, removing the redundant provisions, retaining all of the current PCAB provisions. This is another board where, after I got to thinking about it, since this is not governed by anything higher than the city, we could also take these provisions, which this document recommends stay in the code. We could take these and place them here in the handbook and then just eliminate the code provision completely. Same as we did the previous board, I think Board of Adjustment. Does that work? Mm-hmm. And I did have under the duties and in the code itself, I did change the language to reflect what we recently passed regarding site plan review by P&Z, the provision about they don't do it unless it's over 5 acres. And so this language here reflects the latest in what we have done regarding that board. And when I was talking to John Stone regarding this, some other matters came up, and I realized that there are a number of parts of the LDRs that pertain to this board when they are conducting hearings, and those provisions are never given to the board members, and that's a huge oversight. For instance, the procedures they're supposed to follow when they consider conditional uses, rezoning, whatever. And so I've added here, note, in the materials provided to the board before hearings, the building official shall include a copy of all city code provisions governing the subject of the hearing. And John Stone felt that that was a good idea.
Yeah.
And this at least puts people on notice that these things are out there. They need to see them before they start meeting.
Okay.
Are we okay with this?
We are.
Okay.
Okay. Any further questions from council before I open it up for public? This time open up the floor for public comment.
Just one, if you're looking for a uniform time, the retirement board will not work.
Yeah.
If you're looking for a uniform common time, you cannot do that with a retirement board. We need to work during normal business hours so we have access to our lawyers in Miami and the offices in Tallahassee and the investment accounts. So
Okay.
That's fine. Thank you for
they
letting us know
need
that.
an exception for that one.
Yeah, we can.
Okay.
That's.
We'll do
that's
it.
fine. Yes.
Thanks.
Yeah, make sure the board's functional that way.
I have a couple of other things regarding the city charter. Every citation in the city code that has been prepared by MuniCode, every citation they made to the city charter is incorrect. And I realized that they were using the old city charter, not the one that was adopted in 2009. So every single city charter reference in MuniCode is wrong. And also, I've asked Mr. Beadle to look into section Florida Statute 195.207, because on plain reading of that, it appears that that referendum that passed in the 2012 election that required a supermajority regarding millage rate and utility taxes is unlawful, violates Florida statute. And if that's correct, the last words in the statute are, "It is hereby nullified and repealed." So,
I guess we have two issues here, correct?
yes.
We have that, and then the city code being wrong. What do we do in the city code point?
But the city, what do you mean, the city?
Well, first is city charter.
City charter.
Right.
If it's null and void, I think you just don't even do anything with it. It has no validity.
I told Lorraine I have to go back and look at what I'd looked at before whenever it was brought up. I don't, it was 2 years ago. I don't remember what was.
Could we do that? Just,
No, I am.
yeah, okay.
How about the MuniCode?
How about the MuniCode stuff?
Well, they just need to be told to do that.
We're actually in the process of transitioning to a company that allows the city to instantaneously update the code
Good.
versus every year. Costs were significantly less, half the cost of MuniCode. They charge us, some of the fees are sort of high. It still looks like MuniCode, and there's a link to MuniCode, so we can always transition back to MuniCode if we need. But we're in the process, and that will take, it'll be a while before that happens, but, yeah.
I actually ran into that guy from that company at the annual conference. He was down there, and
We're in the process of just working with him to,
Yeah.
we're actually going to be one of the pilot cities. We can always transition back to MuniCode at any time, so that would be the time to clean up all of these provisions, implement these types of things, to post those, instantaneously. Well, I say within the several weeks, we can have if the codes adopted by the council, it can be on our website and on our MuniCode, basically, within a couple of weeks, versus taking a whole year and then.
Good.
Reference time-wise.
For to move to e-regulations, I'm not going to feel comfortable until we go through it with a fine-tooth comb.
We're in the
Formatting and they're copying from MuniCode, so if MuniCode is wrong, you're having to start from square one, in my opinion.
But we're able to manually make the changes in the e-regulations.
Let me ask you this question then. If it's wrong now, why would you copy something wrong back in that's still wrong and then go back and correct it? Why don't we just put the right stuff in?
That's what, before we go live with e-regulations, right now we're still with MuniCode. Before we go with e-regulations, it would give us the opportunity to make those corrections, and we can make those ourselves versus having MuniCode go back, and they charge us for all of that stuff. To do that manually, we can do it in-house now, basically manage our own codes. Not now. We're working in conjunction with MuniCode, and then once we're comfortable with e-regulations, we're going to switch to the e-regulations.
Okay. You're comfortable with this? You like the
Yeah.
system?
So far, it's a newer, what's that?
I said you weren't working in it with them to see the glitches right now. There's still going to be a while.
Yeah.
It's going to take a while to get to where we need to be,
But the code is the code online at the end of the day. You go through, you have your sections, your chapters, you click on them, and as long as everything's accurate there, then it's the same type of MuniCode face, other than it allows us to instantaneously do the work ourselves.
Yeah, and when we finish with this, there are going to be a number of code provisions that we're going to rescind, so we can get that updated.
Now,
also.
if the e-regulations does not work, then we'll have to go back to MuniCode and we'll have to revise the entire code through MuniCode, and they'll probably charge us for that as well.
Even though they did it wrong.
Would have to check and see that, yeah. If they did it wrong from initially, I wouldn't think that we wouldn't be billed for that. We shouldn't be billed for that. But believe it or not, I mean, MuniCode is quite expensive to, if you're redoing your entire code, I mean, it's a $25,000, $30,000 undertaking. So that's why we're wanting to, I just say that, I mean, for the cities that don't have their codes codified and they go to codify, you know, they have to put an RFP out and there's a big expense for someone to go in and do that. We have MuniCode, so if we make a change, we send them the changes, they charge us to make the changes right now. So if we change the entire code and it was their mistake, then they'll need to pay for that, I would imagine.
Great. Question to you, next workshop.
My next thing on the agenda is that stormwater beach caster. And I used to have a personal life. And for the month of October, I'm going to resume it because there are things that I need to take care of for myself. And so we're talking November for the next workshop. And right now, I can't give you a date, because
When is the beach cast, when is that beach caster, stormwater thing gonna come out?
it has to go to the printer next week.
Oh, okay, so that, you're working on that now?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll give you off till November.
Thank you.
All right, so in November, we're going to continue with the next section of,
I think that realistically, we can pass the ordinance in December that wraps this up, and that's a good way to start the new year.
so let me ask this, just so from a timing, we do it in November, then we give it to Jim, or you're going to need 2 more workshops before it goes to Jim?
Basically, we can possibly do it in 1 more workshop. We have to go over 4 more boards, the 2 retirement boards, the CPAB, and the CRAC.
So there's 4 of them. Sorry, 4. 4 boards? There's 4 more boards to go over?
Yeah, and then that ends this part of the handbook. And then I've made the changes that were suggested for Part 1, our last workshop. And so you need to see those again. So I could probably get all of that stuff in 1 more workshop.
Okay. All right, sounds good.
And just for informational purpose, at your next commission meeting, you'll be adopting or approving, council meeting, I'm sorry, approving or looking to approve some more assisted hearing devices and some upgrades to our sound system here, so.
I vote yes.
Yes, okay. I figured you would.
Lorraine, run past again the whole referendum comment that you made earlier, because that's kind of, I want to hear it again.
Yeah,
And dumb it down, tell me the whole thing.
the referendum question that passed was requiring a 4/5 supermajority for the council to increase any millage rate beyond what currently existed, and to increase any kind of public service, like the utility fee. And Florida Statute 195.207 says, no, and I'm reading the words that pertain to our charter, no municipal charter may limit the authority of the governing body to levy ad valorem taxes or utility service taxes that are authorized under this particular section. Any word, sentence, phrase, or provision of any municipal charter that limits a municipality from levying ad valorem taxes within the millage rates fixed by the Article so-and-so of the state constitution, or that limits a municipality from levying utility service taxes within the limits fixed by the statute, is hereby nullified and repealed.
Jim, you will look into that? Okay. And Andy, you'll pass that on to Courtney?
Yes, sir.
Okay, then, I mean, I know Jim's got to look into it, but tell me how that process would move forward from the council standpoint.
Well,
Just and hypothetically, and if Jim doesn't want any comment at this time, that's fine. I'm just kicking it around in my head.
well, if if my conclusion is correct, then that provision has no validity whatsoever. And you'd have two choices. You would send it to Municode to put it in there and show that it was repealed, or you just don't send it in there, put it in the first place because it had no validity. So the last part would be my preference.
Jim, you want to look it up first?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Okay, that's fine.
My thing
That's
is,
fine.
let's go through a process with Jim, not doubting Lorraine, but just saying he's, the board attorney here.
We're paying.
That's what we're paying
Yeah,
him for.
and
the
please,
big bucks, so.
please understand, I'm not taking a position. I just kind of wanted to, when I'm driving down the road, be able to think about this, so.
And I want to know kind of also, how's it going to affect what we do? If it's wrong, it's illegal, can't be there, it shouldn't be there.
Okay.
But how do we go?
Well,
through
the
process?
issue is I need to go back and figure out what
Went on?
went on during that period of time also, as far as how we got to that point, because I thought I remembered that we asked for an informal Attorney General's opinion. I don't remember per se that this was what it was on or not, but I remember that there was one done back then, so that's part of what I need to go back and look in my files about.
All right. Any further business?
That's enough.
Public comment.
I'd just like to say,
I had
Lorraine,
public comment, and there was only one, unless there's someone else who wants to make a public comment.
the only thing I want to say is, Lorraine, thank you.
Thank you. And we'll vote, for your ears next time.
And what?
We're going to vote for your ears next time.
Oh, yeah.
Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.